The biggest opportunity is for organizations that are fearless. They have fearless leadership. The CEO is willing to explore new markets. They're willing to take new ideas and put them into the organization.
I'm Ed Marsh, host of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast, and today I'm joined by Amy Franko. Amy is a sales strategist for growth-oriented mid-market organizations. She began her sales career in technology, selling hardware solutions for manufacturers like IBM and Lenovo, and today she works with a variety of sectors to grow sales results through sales strategy, sales process consulting, and skill development programs. In addition to her consulting work, she's an author, she's a speaker, she's an independent director. Her book, The Modern Seller, is an Amazon bestseller, and she's also recognized by LinkedIn as a top sales voice. On this podcast, we talk about a wide range of topics from governance and strategy through marketing and sales and customer experience. But there's no doubt that sales and everything that sales entails is one of the biggest and one of the most consistently challenging. So we come back to that frequently, and I'm thrilled to have Amy here today to share her insights with us. Be sure, you know the drill, like, share, comment, and of course, subscribe so others can find this and benefit from the guest insights like we're going to get from Amy. So with that, welcome, Amy.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Ed.
Absolutely. I appreciate you taking time to visit today. You must be in a little bit of a lull right now between all the spring and fall corporate events, taking a break from speaking engagements. Is it giving you a chance to catch your breath a little bit?
You know, it's interesting because I've learned over the years to make sure I have enough diversification in my business. So when things like speaking hit some like summer lulls or whenever that happens to hit, I'm always busy with either sales strategy projects or rolling out sales training programs. I have quite a few clients that are going to kick off in the fall, kind of like back to school.
Got it. Do you use the time to create any new talks, or are your standard talks the ones that you're rolling with for the coming year?
You know, I get a lot of requests to customize the talks that I have. So I have a core stable of 4 or 5 different topics that I speak on. And then invariably, I will be asked to, add commentary, add, other current events to a topic. So I'm probably always creating from that standpoint. And it's interesting with training. There's always an opportunity to create new skill development programs. I continually keep those fresh. So I feel like there's always something new and different going on.
Yeah, for sure. Tell me, the one that jumped out at me as I looked at your speaker profile and your typical topics, the ripple effect. That one intrigued me. Tell me about that one.
You know, the ripple effect it's one of those topics that's great for either a group of leaders, whether they're sales leaders or other leaders in an organization, or people that are individual contributors in sales. Because the idea is that no matter what title we have a leadership identity, we have a leadership responsibility. And that particular talk gets into the nuts and bolts of how to develop influence and allow that influence to ultimately create impact. So I have a client that I'm taking a variation of that topic on in a couple of weeks, and we're wrapping it up in a conversation around leadership presence.
Nice. I mean, it feels like that encapsulates the difference between management and leadership. I think anybody at any level can be a leader. It's independent of the org chart. It's a matter of character and performance and attitude in many ways. Do you agree?
I do agree. And the one thing I would add to that is also the leaders that are in the organization that are leaders by title. What do they do to make sure that they foster that type of culture in the organization?
Right.
And I especially see it in sales. And sales is one of those, I hate to call it a zero-sum game, but you either make your quota or you don't make your quota. And allowing especially sales organizations that those self-leaders to rise up. They're role models for their teams. They're usually the ones that are out there with new creative ideas and working with their customers and clients. So I found the healthiest organizations have leaders by title who foster and grow leaders who are not leaders by title.
Yeah, the biggest mistake that often happens is that sales rep that demonstrates those attributes then suddenly gets picked up to be a sales manager, where they may be a completely poor fit. They may flail. They take the number off the street. They've got somebody in that role who now doesn't inspire the people working with them, and it's such a horrendous waste for the organization.
Yeah, and that might be a little bit of a fine tuning difference between the attributes that someone brings to the role and the skills that someone brings to the role.
Right.
And you and I have both worked with Objective Management Group and their data, and working with leaders and managers and sales teams. And I can't tell you how many times I've had the conversation with an organization where they either want to hire someone or promote someone because of certain attributes that they bring to the table, but not enough of a deep dive on the actual skills that are
Right.
required for the job. And then you end up with that mismatch, and no one's happy.
Yeah. And the thing that seems to tie really closely with leadership is accountability. Coming from the military, I see them almost as synonymous in many cases. You can certainly differentiate or distinguish between the two of them. But I also sense, and we're going to talk more about sales training and that kind of stuff as the conversation goes along, but I think we have a crisis in accountability in American business, particularly in sales organizations. That makes training harder. It makes setting expectations harder. It makes achieving results harder. Do you see that or not?
I do see it. And I think about myself in accountability. And I think of myself as a pretty highly accountable individual. I've been an entrepreneur for the last 18 years, and there's a lot of self-starting and accountability that goes along with being successful there, right?
Right.
But even then, I have my best accountability when I'm publicly accountable to somebody and there's a deadline
Sure.
around that accountability. Those two tools have helped me tremendously in my personal life and my professional life. I see it a lot, not just in sales training, but I see it a lot in sales strategy. When companies set sales or growth strategy, accountability is one of those leaky faucet points in making a strategy successful.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to execute the strategy. And if you're not accountable, then there isn't consistent execution. There's spurts, but there's no enduring, persistent effort.
Everyone's excited about creating
Yep.
strategy, and then you get this big gap between the excitement of creating it and implementing it, and it's in that gap that things like accountability come into play.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Let's back up in your career. When you were a Lotus Notes administrator, did you envision that you'd be a best-selling author and sales consultant?
No, and I have to tell you, this is the second day in a row that someone has mentioned to me being a Lotus Notes administrator, which is really kind of funny because that was so far back in my career. And it's just something that in the early stages of my career. So no, I wouldn't have envisioned that, but it's one of those stops on the journey early in my career where I got more into the nuts and bolts of technology, if you will, not just selling
Right.
it, but actually being in the trenches. I learned that wasn't going to be a long-term career for me, but I'm also really grateful that I worked in that space for, 2, 3, 5
Sure.
years, because I think the thought processes and jumping into something new and different. I had no background in it. I didn't study technology in college. Having no background in it and jumped into it, my employer sponsored me to take courses and get certified. That was a great launching point. And it's something I'm glad I did. I learned what I didn't want to do for the long term, but it was a definite springboard to the career I have now.
So I think majored in English, then did IT, and then
Mm-hmm.
started with IBM,
Yes.
and then IBM through a transaction with Lenovo. How did that sales career, the early part of your sales career, unfold?
It's I've had a bit of a winding career, which probably a lot of people watching and listening to this can relate to. I was an English and communications major in college. I worked for a couple of tech companies in college where I got an opportunity to just observe the environment, work on different projects in these organizations. And the thing that I always thought was like, the salespeople seem like they're having the most fun. They're the ones that are leaving the office, going to see clients and have meetings. And I'm like, that seems kind of fun. But when I graduated, I decided to pursue a career in sales, at least get my start there. So my very first job out of college was inside sales, working for an IBM business partner. And that was really the springboard into technology, but then kind of winding my way into more IT work, if you
Hmm.
will, before then emerging and having an opportunity at IBM. And the story with that is that's just the power of relationships and networks. There was somebody that I knew from my work at the business partner who introduced me into IBM and helped me get my foot in the door there. And that was just a great point for me to build my resume with a company like IBM that ultimately sold to Lenovo, which that's its own set of lessons that we can get into. But I've had a winding career that, at some points in my life, I thought, gosh, I wish I would have found like the one thing that I wanted to do. Like I was at the dentist earlier this week, and he's like, I have known since I was 12 that I wanted to be a
Wow.
dentist. That was not me.
Right.
I've had a really winding career. And now looking back on it 25 years later, I'm grateful that I had the winding career because it has really opened me up to a lot of opportunities that I think helps me to be better with my sales
Sure.
clients.
When you started at IBM, did they still have the legendary sales training program going on?
They did. That would have been in the early
Okay.
2000s. So they did have the legendary sales training programs still happening, the global programs, sales school, and the like.
And you had an opportunity to go through that?
I had an interesting experience. I did get some of it, but a lot of it was the role that I took on was a marketing role that then turned into a sales role. So I actually got a lot of really practical experience by spending time with sellers. I would go on calls with them. I would help them write their proposals. I would configure and do
So kind
pricing.
of sales
So
ops?
I got a lot of those. Yeah. So I got a lot of that practical experience before getting into a quoted
Got
sales
it.
role.
One question that I just keep coming back to, and you may argue is not the case if you're out there doing a lot of sales training these days, but I wonder how we've drifted so far as businesses from a culture where sales training was expected. I mean, people would spend their first year working for a company in training, whether it's IBM or Xerox or HP or the others that emulated them, to today where it seems like there's none in so many companies. How did that happen?
Yeah. Oh, it's probably one of those things that happen slowly over
Sure.
time. And then you look back over a decade or two, and then we ask the question, how did this happen? Um, Probably two or three things. If I think about large enterprises, those programs, when they were really in their prime, I think there was a lot more latitude for allowing somebody to develop into a role before having a really large quota number. Those were also the days where you could hit an annual number and be totally
Right.
fine. And that business, that annual business then became a 6 month business, which has become a quarterly business and is really
And now a
compressed.
2 week ramp.
So, right. And the business, your quotas are assigned, sometimes
Mhm.
quarterly, sometimes at the 6 month mark. So just the way businesses are led and managed today doesn't necessarily coincide with allowing someone to be in a training mode for a year. There's so much more expectation of somebody within the first 90 days, 6 months at most.
And really, all there is sales manager coaching at this point. I mean, there may be some videos for somebody to watch or a best practices manual to read. Maybe somebody talks through sales process in a huddle one morning a week. But these folks come in with these really extraordinary expectations of them and very little support to achieve it. It's very Darwinian.
And when I have these conversations with my clients, there's a lot of research out there from a variety of different sources. I would say the consistency with this topic is that it really does take somebody even seasoned anywhere from 9 to 12 months to be fully onboarded into an organization. So if you have a lot of fits and starts, if you're not matching the right skills and the right fit for the role, you get 3 months in or 6 months in, and you're not seeing progress, let alone
Especially
performance.
if your onboarding
Um,
is really just orientation. Fill out the health insurance form, get the laptop, understand the expense policy, and now go get to work.
Here's your laptop and here's your
Right.
quota. Go
Yep.
forth and conquer. Um, the reverse side of that, though, is, and this has been my experience in the mid market. So when I first started, working at IBM and Lenovo, obviously huge enterprises, I worked with a variety of different clients, enterprise, SMB, public sector. But now today I work with a lot of mid-market sized companies. And just for a frame of reference, they probably range anywhere from like 50 million to 500 million and anywhere in between. It's interesting to see, and maybe this is a trend, we'll see how it plays out, companies that want to bring back that formal skill
Really?
development. They want to create a culture. They want to have a program. They've never had it. So I've had several of those conversations just in the last six
Great.
months. Mm-hmm.
That's fabulous. So I'm going to be interested as we talk later about the role of boards and governance and independent directors, whether they're driving that or resisting it. I want to dig into that. But first, thinking about, I guess it was maybe 7 years that you were at IBM and Lenovo, and then you decided it was time. You were going to hang out your own shingle. What prompted that? How did you know it was time to move on, and how did you decide to just start your own gig?
Yeah, I'm the oldest of five. I have four younger sisters. So I think some of that was in my DNA. I knew from a pretty early age that I would either lead something or start something, and it's very cool that I've had the opportunity to do both of those things many times now in my life and career. Um, so I think part of that was just knowing that was something that would be in my path at some point, but you never know where the opportunity is going to find you or where you're going to find the opportunity. And I'd had a couple good sales years, so I had a few good commission checks in the bank to lean on, and a friend colleague of mine ran a small training and development company here where I live in Columbus, Ohio, and the timing just simply happened to be right, where there was a need for people to design and develop training. And I was looking for the opportunity to make that next leap. And it was really helpful that the clients were tech clients. So there was a nice fit between already my
Right.
natural capabilities and background. So it was one of those moments where I really vividly remember this because I was probably 29 or 30 at the time. And I remember thinking, I really don't want to look back in 10 years, say when I turn 40, and wish I would have given it a try. What's the very worst thing that could happen? It doesn't work out, and I go back into an organization and I have a sales role because I think being in sales was probably the number one best job I could have had to prepare me for being an
Right.
entrepreneur. So that was a little bit of the catalyst and the thought process behind it. And after that, it's really one foot in front of the other. It's I remember hiring a business coach to help me design a business plan. That was my first investment in
Mm-hmm.
myself after going out on my own. And just the act of making that investment, creating the business plan, and just moving forward one step at a time, really.
Have you ever wondered if you made a mistake along the way?
Ooh, well, I've had points in my career, in my entrepreneurial career, where it's like, oh, maybe I should have stayed in my sales role for a couple more years. Maybe I should have done this, that, or the other. There was a point, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, where I was just burned out. I wasn't enjoying the work. I'd been doing it at that point for 8 or 9 years. I had built a team. I had a team of employees and contractors. I was fortunate enough to build a bench of some excellent clients of a variety of different industries and sizes, but I just wasn't enjoying it like I
Right.
used to. And that was a bit of an inflection point for me where I said, well, I basically can go down one of two paths. I can, well, three paths really. I can keep doing what I'm doing and I'm going to eventually burn out. I can stop what I'm doing and take a sales role and get back into an organization, or I can retool the business to be what I really want it to be. And I was really earnestly thinking about going back into a sales role. And I had had some conversations with some leaders that I respected here in town. And after having some of those conversations, I realized, the third option is really what I want to do. If I was going back into an organization, I'd really be doing it for, the paycheck or the logo on the business card or what have you. So over about 2 or 3 years time, I retooled the business to be what I really wanted it to be for myself. So that's everything that you see today. And it took a good couple of years from that decision point to be on that path and to be able to create basically a new track
Right.
record, if you will.
Interesting. So today you do lots of work on what you call sales strategy. How do you define sales strategy, and how is that different than other sales topics?
When I have this conversation with clients, we usually talk about three different types of strategy. There is growth, a kind of growth or visionary strategy. Where would I like the organization to be 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road? Which feels like if you can see that far down the road, great.
So that's kind of
But
corporate
what's that?
strategy.
Yeah. So what's the vision for your
Okay.
business? Then there's sales strategy and its sister, marketing strategy, that are the two lead generation, revenue, profit generation engines of the business that need to be in lockstep and need to be very well defined to help you get to where you want to go. So, where I find a lot of my conversations with CEOs or sales leaders, more CEOs probably, there's the big picture of where we'd like to be. But a lot of times, the supporting sales strategy and marketing strategy either don't exist or there is something that's been created, but it just simply isn't relevant anymore. And those two pieces are missing and need to be created and implemented and held accountable
So what
to.
goes into sales
So I
strategy? Is it
think,
sales
okay,
process? Is it the defining the ICP so you know who you want to sell to? Is it a target account strategy? What is it?
yeah. So the short answer is it looks different for every
Okay.
client, but broad brushstrokes. It's typically not sales process. So when I help clients think through where they want to be, we look at strategy, we look at structures, which I put process in there, and we look at
Okay.
skill development. So strategy contains the categories for growth. So, what markets do we want to pursue? What are the target industries and clients that we want to pursue? What does a great client look like? So, to your point of ICP, how are we going to create lead generation outside of marketing, and how does marketing support us? So, it's the growth pieces that are contained within sales strategy. Process and structure will ultimately support that.
Makes sense. Um, you said that you also talk about corporate strategy, and the idea of strategy takes us up a couple levels. Let's put aside the fact I think often people conflate strategy and tactics. Um, but when we start talking about corporate strategy, that raises the question of the roles of the owners and the independent directors and governance and how that fits into strategy. Obviously, we both get dirt under our fingernails working with companies, but we also think in the context of governance. And I find that most boards today have nobody on the board with contemporary sales insight and no understanding of the questions that they should be asking, understanding that they're not operating, that they're overseeing, but still they have to be able to ask probing questions as part of their governance responsibility to understand what the company is doing in terms of sales. I don't see that they can do it. Do you see the same thing?
I do see the same thing, and over the last year, I've become an angel investor, and I belong to a fund here in Columbus, and to a deal to a company, this conversation around sales and marketing continually
Mm-hmm.
comes up, and the need to have somebody on a board with contemporary, modern understanding of sales, not to run the sales team, not to be in the operational tactics, but to ask the questions and shed a light on how you're going to operate in these ever-changing market
Right.
conditions.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
we know that 40% of deals end in no decision, 40% of reps consistently miss quota, buying teams are now 15 people, buying cycles are getting longer, buyers don't want to talk to reps until they're 70% of the way through their buying journey. There's some important stuff there that the board needs to understand in order to provide oversight. What are the key things that you think boards need to understand about sales and they don't?
if I were to put that into maybe 2 or 3 themes for a board to be thinking about, the first theme is the talent theme and the board's understanding of the talent landscape when it comes to sales professionals and sales leaders. So the landscape of talent, but what's the picture of talent in our organization? So I would have one theme around that. The second theme would be around market opportunity and what's the organization's market opportunity, and do we have sales strategy that supports that market opportunity? What are our risks around that? And I would say the third, this is a bit of an operational bucket, but I do find if you're going to have somebody with sales talent on your board, that individual does have to be able to flex back and forth between strategic thinking and tactical thinking. And what are the structures that the organization needs outside of talent in order to not only optimize your upside, but make sure that you're not putting yourself in a risk position?
Yeah, it's funny that a lot of people in the board space have this hang up that directors can't ask operational questions, except if you look at the audit committee, they've got finance people specifically to be able to ask very tactical operational questions about finance. And I don't understand why sales is somehow viewed different.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in my board service, having that sales and entrepreneurial lens has been different from other roles on the board. So I've sat in finance committee. I led audit committee in my role as board chair for a nonprofit organization. My questions are entirely
Right.
different for audit and finance. So I love that I have my finance friends and my audit friends to ask those questions, but then I will turn it around and say, all right, how does this affect our ability to go to market? How does this affect our ability to bring revenue in the door and have profitable sales? So we bring different questions and skill sets to the table, and it makes for a really productive conversation, and we get a lot better ideas out
Well,
of
that's
it.
the essence of diversity on a board.
Mm-hmm. And diversity is there's a lot of different types of diversity. There's the obvious ones, of course, like your race, your gender, your ethnicity. But I put the sales expert in the skill diversity
Absolutely. Yeah,
bucket. Do you have a diverse board in terms of the skills that they bring to
for
the
sure.
table?
A skills matrix is critical, and so many companies, unfortunately, kind of shortcut there. What kinds of questions should good boards be asking to challenge executive management on the sales strategy and sales execution and sales talent?
If I were to offer up maybe 2 or 3 different types of questions, the first question around talent is I would want to understand the answers to the questions of what does our territory design look like and what kinds of risks do we have there? Do we have the talent to be able to actually meet the revenue goals that the organization has set out? Um, Another question that would be top of mind is to understand what are our best industries that we can pursue? What are our most profitable industries? What about our product mix and our solution mix? Do we have the right types of products and solutions that we can go to market with, and where do we maybe have some risks around that? So I would start there with those types of questions to understand broadly what we're looking at, and then that will typically raise other points of conversation.
And so you get the read ahead materials, and it's got a slide that talks about the revenue versus goal, and that's typically the extent of it. Maybe a little bit of a pipeline overview, some key account projects that are expected to close within the next quarter or something. How do you even challenge that mindset? You're talking about diving deeper than that, and that's the way that boards are accustomed to engaging with sales. How do you soften it, or how do you introduce the topic so that you can have a productive conversation challenging some of these sacred cows?
Yeah, and if you don't have somebody on the board with that lens or having had that experience, they're more likely than not they're not going to know to ask those questions
Right.
necessarily because that's just not their experience, or they're not sure what questions to
Right.
ask if there's something that's like, I'd like to know a little bit more about that. So one example was I've been in situations where I'm looking at that type of sales data, and there's in SaaS technology companies, there's always conversation about
Right.
churn, and it really doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you're a manufacturer, if you are in tech, there's some kind of churn that's in your business, whether that's you're holding on to inventory or you're not selling through it, or you have customer churn. And so I was in a meeting and looking at that line, and what I noticed was that there wasn't any. And my comment was, "Oh, I noticed that there isn't any churn here. Let's talk about that because this looks really positive." That ultimately uncovered challenges that are going to be coming in the future that had that question not been asked, it would have just been set aside until the next
Mm.
board meeting, a quarter down the road, where it was going to probably be a much larger problem. So that's just a live example of being able to take a look at the data and what's the story that the data is telling me, and maybe what are the stories that the data isn't
Right.
telling me that I need to be paying attention to.
So you're in Ohio. You spent a lot of your career in Ohio. Are you an Ohio native?
Mhm. I am. I grew up in the Cleveland area. A lot of my family still lives there. I went to college at the University of Dayton, and then I landed in Columbus kind of sight unseen out of college. I landed here, got my first job out of college, and it's like, oh, I'll stay here for a couple of years, and then, I'll see where to. But love it here. I've stayed here now for almost 30
Wow.
years. So I have been here my entire life.
So you grew up and you live in the heart of the Rust Belt. You work on selling technology, but let's compare maybe and contrast selling technology with industrial sales that may be, kind of what we think of when we think of Ohio.
Yeah. What's interesting is I work across a variety of industries, and I purposefully decided not to niche down too
Mm-hmm.
much. I have some industries that I spend a lot of time in, like professional services, but manufacturing is one that I've had the great opportunity to build some good clients in. And I think my career background in manufacturing and in sales, helps me to build those relationships. The challenges are a lot the same. They might be talked about a little bit differently. Talent and finding sales talent is a huge challenge in the manufacturing industrial space. Um, Complex sales, balancing complex sales and transactional sales is what I'm going to say. Because I have clients that have multiple business segments where some of what they're
Right.
selling in the industrial space is highly custom. It's a very complex sale, and contrast that with other areas of the business where it's high transactions, a lot of transactions, but low price
Mm-hmm.
tags, if you
Yeah,
will.
I work a lot in capital equipment. So selling the upfront equipment, $1 million, $5 million, whatever it is, versus the aftermarket where there's a stream of spare parts and consumables that are much more transactional.
Yes. And one of the conversations we have a lot is how to build a sales team that isn't simply looking at the initial
Mm-hmm.
sale. So you're selling $1 million piece of equipment or a $5 million piece of equipment, or you're selling, $100 part. How to think of yourself as a consultative seller and build those skills, and how to be that person for your customers and your
How many
prospects.
industrial
That's a
companies,
conversation we have a lot.
how many industrial companies that you work with do you find even track or understand the lifetime value opportunity of a new customer?
Mm, it's low. It's an opportunity for them to understand that data, and a lot of times they don't have the data to be able to do that type of analysis all in one system.
I find that it's very rare, even a back of the napkin calculation. I mean, I take people through the math. Let's say it's $1 million machine sale, somewhere 3 to 5% per year in aftermarket revenue from it. and typically a 20-year lifespan, and they typically sell a second machine somewhere between 7 and 12 years. So, I mean, you can do that calculation pretty easily. Now, it's a WAG, and every account's not going to be the same, but you start to look at your cost of sales, the sales talent you need, the way you approach accounts, the way you define target accounts, the way you market, what you invest in marketing. You look at it very differently when you understand it in that context, as opposed to, well, it's $1 million deal with a 15% margin, of which we're going to pay 3% commission. So we're making 12% on the deal. And so there's $120,000. No, I mean, the lifetime value means that that's whatever that works out to, a $600,000 value over the course of the next 20 years.
And to take that example and tie it back to sales strategy and sales process, that example is a great one around what is the value of the initial sale? What's the long-term value? What's the long-term sales growth opportunity that we have? And how do we approach that with our top 10% of our clients? How do we improve that to get it down to the next tier? And then along with that, what is the analysis? What are the processes that will help us be successful with
And then
that?
stepping back to your point on talent, can we do that if we have average talent? I mean, by definition, most salespeople are average. I try to talk to companies about finding second standard deviation sales talent, which means, you know, a very elite group. And people are surprised. Well, why would you hire a mediocre CFO? Would you hire a mediocre production manager? No. I mean, maybe you make a mistake. Maybe you get somebody that's not perfect in some ways, but great in other ways. And I mean, that's reality. But you don't set out to say, I want to find somebody who's in the 40th percentile because I think they're going to fit in well.
Yes. And to add to that, if you do have somebody that either doesn't have a seller that doesn't have that thought process or those skills to do that type of work, what are the structures around that person to help them to be successful? Right. So how strong is their direct manager? How good are the processes and structures around them? I see a lot of organizations across all industries fearful of letting go of somebody who is mediocre talent because they don't stay on top of the talent marketplace to understand what their options are. And they say, well, somebody sitting in that seat is better than nobody sitting in that seat.
And the opportunity cost is huge. What's your take? I believe companies ought to continuously recruit. They ought to always be out looking for great sales talent with the idea that maybe they'll build relationships, maybe they'll make a place for somebody that's extraordinary. But a lot of companies, first, they don't have an efficient recruiting process. They don't use something like a sales candidate assessment. So they end up talking to people that they shouldn't be talking to. And then they say, well, we don't think that's fair to be recruiting if we're not actually planning on hiring somebody right now. And I understand that argument. I think you can be clear about that when you talk to people to help them understand. But am I off base? What do you think about continuous recruiting?
I like the idea of continuous recruiting, and there might be a nuance there between actively recruiting for an open role versus nurturing relationships over time. It would be like a seller saying, well, you know what? I just closed this $1 million opportunity. I don't need to talk to them again until they're ready to buy another $1 million deal. You wouldn't do that. And it's the same idea in relationship building for current and future sales talent. I would say you can do it at the leadership management level in addition to the individual contributor level. Because when you're out in the marketplace having those conversations, it's basically good PR and good marketing. And those sellers and those leaders see you and they're like, they're out there building these relationships. They must be a great place to work for.
Good point.
I should keep a relationship going with them.
Back to the topic of boards, you volunteer quite a bit. I think you just finished a decade or more on the board and as the chair of the regional Girl Scouts. Did you have daughters in Scouts, or how did you get associated with Girl Scouts?
No, actually. So, gosh, it's crazy to think it has been a decade. I think 2014 is when I started. I don't have kids myself. I do have four younger sisters. I didn't grow up in Girl Scouts. Girl Scouts found me as an adult. A good friend, colleague of mine was volunteering on the board and introduced me to the CEO. And after that, it's like, you had me at your mission. Where do you want me? I'm happy to help out and volunteer. I got my start on board development, which would be like the equivalent of a nominating governance type committee. And it was a governance board. Girl Scouts of Ohio's Heartland is a governance board. And so I chaired board development for 2 years, and I served on the committee for 4. And our role was to find current and future board talent and to be out in the marketplace, having those conversations, and also to ensure board performance. To be truthful, I didn't know that type of function existed until I had the opportunity to volunteer for it, and just absolutely loved that work. And from there, after serving, because you have to roll off these committees, from there, I became board chair. And so I was the board chair for 4 years.
So going back to 2 points we've talked about, number one, board skills matrix, and number 2, continuous recruiting. Did you incorporate both those ideas in your NomGov work?
Yes, and I remember this very vividly when I took the role, because this is a great lesson in taking a role that I really didn't. It wasn't as if I had a lot of preparation to take this role. It was saying yes to something that really interested and intrigued me. And when something is exciting to me, I will dive in and I will do the work and I will figure it out. And that was this type of role. I remember sitting down with the board chair and the CEO, and I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. And my vision is, I want this to be the board of choice for any leader in our region. I want to line out the door of people who want to be on our board. So I started with a vision, just kind of coming back to this conversation. I started with a vision for what I wanted this to be. And then I looked at the talent on the committee team and set forth maybe 3 pillars of where I wanted to invest our time and resources, and assigned committee leads to those, and just really took it on a strategic and also a systematic basis to build that functionality into the organization. I would say probably one of the biggest things that we did was we had a lot of tactical talent on the board, and over about 3 to 5 years time, it just took that amount of time to move some of that tactical talent and introduce more strategic talent onto the board.
Yeah, and often nonprofit boards are very much based on nice people from the community that are willing to actually show up and participate and stroke the check and bring other people in. I love the fact that you call it out as specifically a governance board, and that you moved it in that direction to make sure that the board had the strategic chops in order to provide oversight.
The other interesting thing, which I think kind of comes back to the talent, who you choose to be on your team or on your board. There's we could have pursued CEO level talent, but what we ultimately landed on was those are probably individuals that are getting requests to be on multiple boards, whether they are corporate boards or they are nonprofit boards. They may or may not have the time or wherewithal to participate and be engaged in the way that would help us and help them. Let's think about who in the organization, what level, like a level or 2 down in the organization, that have leadership titles, they have leadership influence, they may have more bandwidth and wherewithal to really be engaged with our board, and we would all get more out of it. So it was conversations like those to think about what is the true talent that we're looking for, and what are the true skills that we're looking for.
And did you ever bring in any junior people with the idea of being a talent incubator to help give them organizational kind of perspective?
We did. And that's one of those things that I think we can all be better at, but to purposefully pursue some people that were younger in their career, maybe in some different cutting edge fields, to invite them to be a part of our board. Now, in all candor, not all of them worked out the way that we thought that they would, but many of them, by virtue of joining our board, they may not have stayed on the board the entire time, but they joined other committees and they joined other initiatives that we had, and they contributed in that way. And at least in our organization, our girls range from 5 to 18. So to be able to see people that are maybe a little bit younger in their career, men, women, to interact with them in different ways benefited them as much as it benefited our board.
And when you onboarded them, did they have a board buddy or a mentor? How did you try to help them with that steep ramp to understand what their role was as a board member?
Yeah, we did institute a board buddy system, and varying degrees of success with board buddy systems. You really have to choose carefully or intentionally to match the right people. But yes, we would have a board buddy, and I remember I was assigned as a board buddy for an incoming board member who had board tenure in other places, but just not within our organization. And I think the magic in that was we had a couple of upfront conversations, scheduled a couple together. And then after that, it was like, what's going to be beneficial for you? And then what we ultimately landed on was let's talk once a quarter, or just bring things as you need them to be brought up, so that we really tailored the board buddy experience to that person.
And you talked about board performance. What systems did you implement for 360 reviews or individual board performance reviews or something like that?
Yeah, so we were fortunate in that we had resources from Girl Scouts USA and metrics that were part of being on a board. So I probably had, I don't know, 6 to 12 different metrics that we had to track. Some were more compliance in nature, meeting attendance and the like. Some were more subjective in nature around, let's talk about this person's engagement, what they're bringing to the table. So we did have some of those processes in place. What I found was, and I was on the finance committee. The finance committee chair did something really creative that I liked and was different from what I would have thought to do, which is she had created basically a self-assessing skills matrix, brought it to the committee and said, all right, let's take a look at all the skills we think we have as a committee and where we think we have gaps and what we think might be some future skills. So that was really interesting to see that work happen in a committee and then be able to bump it up a little bit higher in the organization.
Switching gears a little bit, you're certified as, I don't know the exact title, but Women's Business Enterprise National Council. Are you active in support of women in business and sales specifically?
Yes. I'm going to take that question a couple different ways. So I'm WBE certified, which essentially means if an organization has diversity spends that they want to use, I'm certified and they can use diversity spend if we're doing a project together in the organization. So I have it, but it's interesting. It's never what I lead with. It ultimately is, if we're a great fit to work together and you need this type of, you need me in your organization, then let's make that happen. And I tend to find that more in enterprise level companies that are tracking diversity spend. Informally, yes, I absolutely, I love to see more women get into the field of sales. I still find more often than not that, I walk into a room of, mostly men in the sales profession. It really just kind of depends on the industry. But I will I will see some women in the room that say, "Oh, it's nice to see you. I'm so glad that they hired you. It's nice to see, somebody like me." But I love to talk to women who are younger in their careers. Maybe they're in their 20s or even if they're in college. So Women's Sales Pros, which Lori Richardson ran for a number of years. The organization's changing a little bit. And so Lori still runs Women's Sales Pros, but there's a scholarship committee that I participate on that awards scholarships to college level women who are studying sales in college. And that is, I love the work. And it just really energizes me to see that there's such an interest and that so many universities are now instituting sales programs or certificates of some kind.
I didn't realize it was that prevalent. Do you have any metrics?
I don't have any in front of me here, but I know at least in Ohio, Ohio University was, I think, one of the very first sales schools in the country. And that was back in the late 90s when there wasn't really such a thing. There is the Sales Education Foundation is a good resource for anybody who's interested in which universities have skill programs and the metrics around that. So I would offer that up as a
But that's
resource.
not an excuse
But
not to train them once you hire them.
right, exactly. Exactly. I love it when young women reach out to me, and I've had quite a few reach out to me on LinkedIn, and they are very proactive and say, I would love to consider a career in sales, or I'm new in sales. Would you be willing to talk to me? It's like, how could I say
Right.
no to that? They're so proactive and they're so enthusiastic. And if a 30-minute conversation with someone like me helps them in any way, I love
That's
it.
great.
So just doing my part to help foster that next generation.
We talked earlier about being solo consultants and how there's highs and lows. There's a lot of flexibility, but there's also a lot of pressure and stress and different times. How do you burn that stress off?
Ooh, I'm a big workout person. So I try to commit to working out 4 days a
What do you
week.
do?
One of the things I do indoor cycling, and then I also there's a bar class that I like to take. Um, I have turned myself into a morning workout person. I'm not naturally a morning workout person, but one of the things I find is just the need for
Right.
structure. Like people think, oh, you work for yourself, you can work whenever you want, which either is people who don't work enough at all, or or they work so much they're working 7 days a week and they've just created the worst. They're working for the worst boss in the
Right.
world
Right.
themselves. So, but what I learned was I needed a different structure to be more successful as an entrepreneur. So I used to work out in the evening, and I found myself just being tired and not following through on it. It's like, all right, I don't want to be a morning workout person, but I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make my way through the sucky part of becoming a morning workout person. And that was probably a year or two ago. And it's amazing how just those little habit changes make such a
So how early?
difference.
What's morning mean for you?
Oh, yeah, like 6 a.m.
Okay.
class.
So you're riding a
So
Peloton?
5 a.m. No, I actually go to a studio. So get in my car and drive to class, which I love to
Really?
do. I like to be with people. It's more motivating for me. So I'm getting up at 5, going to class by 6, home by 7 type of
And what
thing.
time do you start working?
On those days, I'm usually at my desk by 8:30ish.
And until
I
when?
try to read the Wall Street Journal, have breakfast. Depends on the day. So some days I will kind of knock off in the afternoon, like early afternoon, mid
Hmm.
afternoon. Some days, like I had a day this week where I had some things I needed to knock out, and I worked until
Right.
9. But I'm doing less of that. I used to do that a lot more. I'm doing a lot less of nights and weekends, and doing more to put structures into my day. I think any salesperson can relate to this too. Structures into my day where I'm doing more productive work in shorter bursts of
Hmm.
time rather than trying to spread it out and not feeling as
And
productive.
speaking of sales and structure, what percent of your time at this point do you spend on prospecting?
Ooh, I would say so. I think of prospecting as going to, like, I go to events to meet people. There's a number of them here in town. It's reaching out to people on LinkedIn. It's connecting with people that I'm introduced to. I would say between 10 and 20% of my time is dedicated to I'm going to call it building new
Hmm.
relationships, meeting new people, uncovering opportunities.
Got it.
Yeah.
What's something that you love doing and you've worked hard at, but you haven't achieved the level of excellence that obviously you're accustomed to in a variety of other aspects of your life?
Ooh, I just started studying Spanish. So I'm a soy principiante. I'm a beginner. um, didn't study it in high school or college, but a good friend of mine owns a Spanish language school. So my husband and I took lessons from her probably a decade or so ago. And, life kind of got in the way. And after a year or two, I set it aside and didn't get back to it. And it's something I've always wanted to learn and be fluent in another language. And it's like, you know what? I'm not getting any younger. So I just need to take the first step. That's something I've learned to become really good at, is just do the first
Right.
thing that is forward progress. And then that creates momentum to the next piece of forward progress.
And that's so applicable
So,
to sales. I mean, whether we talk about
oh yeah,
prospecting or account planning or there are so many disciplines within sales just require to get started. Don't worry about being perfect. Get started with some good coaching, some good role playing, some good mentoring, and then gradually improve it.
absolutely. And that's Spanish in a nutshell. So I'm doing some online classes through Babbel, but I'm also working with a school in Guatemala where I have private
Well,
instruction twice a week on Teams. I love it. I'm having so much fun with it. That's the key. I'm having a great time with it, and I'm not putting a ton of pressure on myself to, perfect it. It's just as mi maestra would say, poco a poco, little by
and so
little.
what's the next step? A vacation down there somewhere?
Well, maybe. My friend and I, we were talking about doing a trip, like spouse's trip, and maybe going to Central America somewhere. I'd love to go visit Spain. So yes, it's something that's more
Got it.
immersive for sure.
Let's go back to the contrast between tech and IT. And you said, and I agree, there's actually a lot more similarity, I think, than many people think of it. Um, what should industrial companies be thinking about doing? What lessons can they take from tech? How should they be modernizing to use a buzzword, their sales motion, their kind of go-to-market process?
Yeah, a lot of industries, not just the manufacturing sector, but a lot of sectors, and I can partially understand this. There's so much technology that's out there. What is the technology that's going to be useful for us, and what technology is going to suck up our time and our
Right.
resources? Kind of like taking the first step with a foreign language, it's taking the first step in becoming more fluent in understanding what technology is even out there. Um, so there's a mindset, I believe, that has to start from the top: CEO, EVP of sales, that says, we're not going to adopt every technology tool, but we are going to proactively research and use the ones that will be the most useful to
And maybe
us.
instead of talking
Um,
first about the technology, talk about the customer experience, the salesperson efficiency, the data you need to run the company better, and starting from those points, then figure out what technology might plug in and help that. So often, somebody goes to a show or somebody says, "Oh, you got to check this out; it's cool" or whatever, and they sign up for some technology and then they try to build their workflow around it.
Yes, they're engineering it in the wrong
Right.
direction. So starting from the vision or the business function and what technology would support this. I had an interesting conversation with a prospect last week, and we were talking about return on investment. And you know, it's a natural question when you're considering an investment in sales strategy, sales training. What is the return on
Hmm.
investment? And that can be a challenging answer to come up with for a lot of reasons. One is every client of mine has different metrics or measures of success that are important to them. And it's interesting how many of them are qualitative and not quantitative. I want my team to have different behaviors. I want my team to create a better experience for our customers and our prospects. So those can be hard things to measure. So it's understanding so I'll bring this back around to technology in a second, but understanding what's important to the business and the person making the decisions, and then coming up with the right measures of success that they want to track. And then what are maybe some of the technology tools that can help us get
Hmm.
there? Um, the other flip side of that is if you have, and this is kind of nurturing your sales talent, if you have somebody on the team that has a natural proclivity for new technology tools and they're an enthusiast, why dampen that? Maybe there's something that they bring to the team that it's like, here's a new way I've tried to reach out to a
Right.
prospect or client. Here's something new that I'm trying. So I think you can take it from both angles. If you're a smart manager or leader, if somebody's bringing you some of those ideas, to nurture them and not just brush them aside.
Yeah, it makes sense. Um, you focus primarily on sales. how
Mhm.
does marketing fit in? I mean, if prospects are 70% of the way through their buying journey before they want to talk to sales, marketing has to do some of the selling now, right?
Yes, and my conversations around that ultimately becomes integration of marketing strategy with sales
Okay.
strategy. Marketing is one of those interesting things where people go to school to get degrees in marketing, and that might be one field that has changed even more rapidly than the sales field is marketing and how you interact with potential buyers and how technology has changed so much. But the questions I'm asking, and I think this we could tie this back to a board governance conversation too, is not just sales, but what's happening in marketing. What is our marketing strategy? Where are we seeing success? What are our investments? What are our risks? So I'm asking those types of questions of my prospects and clients because ultimately what happens is when we set sales strategy, we ultimately bring marketing along for the ride. And I might actually help them design a marketing strategy that supports sales. Um, I'm not a marketer by degree. I'm more of one by
Mm-hmm.
experience and having been in a variety of different types of organizations and also being an entrepreneur for the last 18 years, just staying on top of what those tools are. But I'm always having a marketing integration conversation because I think you cannot have successful sales without successful
Sure.
marketing.
Absolutely. Thinking about that industrial tech question again, you talked about the technology
Mm-hmm.
piece of it. How about the business model piece? I mean, for instance, BDRs that have been an important part of the tech go to market sales motion for a number of years. I think some industrial manufacturers have experimented with it, but at the same time, I think the tech world is maybe beginning to drift away from it. What do you think about the model question?
When it comes to the industrial markets, I'm seeing middling success with the business development rep
Mm-hmm.
role for a couple of reasons. The first is BDRs in the tech space. Now, I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but BDRs in the tech space, the salary thresholds tend to be much higher than in the industrial space. So you have that going against you when it
Even
comes to finding
Sorry
talent.
for interrupting, but even
No, not at
when
all.
you account for the lure of options, I mean, what I find in account executive or field sales roles in industrial sales is that the pay is comparable. The difference is people in tech have these option packages that they dream are going to turn into life-changing money, and only 5% of the time do they. So, do you think the base pay is substantially different?
Um, it's interesting. Yes, it can be. The conversations I've had, hiring for similar sales roles but different
Mm-hmm.
industries in tech and in SaaS, I'm seeing in some cases, high five, low six figure bases, where in other industries it might be, mid
Got it.
fives to start. Now, again, every organization's different. The interesting question about the options, though, I tend to see that like that is more in the startup space. Like you're hiring somebody that's in the startup space. I see less of that in established tech
Mm-hmm.
organizations. They might be giving stock to high performing reps, but it's not in the form of like equity or options if we're going to, if we're going to
Right.
sell or be acquired. But I think of a BDR as someone who is doing a lot of hunting, they're prospecting, they're turning over all the stones to try to uncover opportunities that then get passed along to, say, an account executive or someone in field sales. I have found varying degrees of success with that in the industrial space. And some of it comes down to how technical the industrial sale is, how complicated it is, and what else is involved. I more often than not am working with sales teams that have established field sellers, maybe some inside sales support, but they do not have a BDR team.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in the tech world that model developed because of this pressure from investors to be generating and scaling quickly, and the BDR model can be efficient in that role. In the industrial space, I've seen where field salespeople just refuse to prospect And so people experiment with the BDR role to try to get somebody in the company prospecting, which feels like a backwards reason to do it.
Yeah, and I've actually seen that scenario that you just described, where you have field sellers who refuse to prospect, and they're not meeting their
Yeah.
number. It's like, okay, what are we going to do with this?
Let's hire somebody to help them. Are you crazy? Fire them and get somebody who's
Right,
going to do the job.
right. Let's spend six figures to hire somebody to help them do the job that they should be
Well,
doing, which I believe every seller needs to
right.
prospect. I don't care what your title is on your business card. If you aren't building new relationships and finding new opportunities, what if that customer that you've had for a decade stops buying
Yeah, or
from
moves
you?
to Mexico or whatever the case may be.
Things that are beyond your
Yep.
control. You have to control what you can control by continuing to fill the top of your pipeline and continuing to build new
Right.
relationships.
How about sales ops? A lot of talk about that in the tech space. Increasingly, I'm starting to hear some awareness in the industrial space. In fact, I had a conversation this morning with a company that's thinking about adding that to their org chart. What's your opinion on sales ops?
I think sales ops are critical. It doesn't have to be something that's overly complicated. I think sometimes organizations, they get it in their head that they have to build out a big sales ops team. It does not have to be complicated. It can be simple. But if there isn't somebody in your organization looking at sales ops and specifically the integrity of your sales data, and that's a critical part to making sure that sellers are successful. So when I see organizations considering this, I fully encourage them to go down that path. I do, however, encourage them to make sure that they're being very thoughtful about it and not just filling a seat, but back to business requirements. What is it that we really require for our company? And then let's figure out how to bring those pieces in.
And how about at the intersection of marketing and sales, an area that I think doesn't get enough attention, sales enablement content? How do you work with companies on understanding what content they need and then making sure that the sellers are well coached on how to use that content?
I back up to sales strategy, which almost always, that topic right there almost always becomes part of sales strategy. And usually the comment is, we don't have enough of X thought leadership, or we don't have enough eyeballs on the thought leadership that we're creating. Is this a worthy investment of our time and money? So that thought leadership, in whatever form it takes, ends up being a part of sales strategy. And then my comment back to any CEO or sales leader is, you can create a lot of thought leadership collateral. There's no shortage of places to put it. Are you using things like skill development and business acumen to make sure that your sellers, even if you do not have a piece of collateral in front of you to lean on, it can become a crutch? That's where I have another conversation, is that collateral becomes a crutch. Let me leave you absolutely everything that I have in the hopes that something will
Right.
stick. Sellers need to be skilled in the right sales conversations, their business acumen, so that in the absence of thought leadership, they are still a thought leader. But marketing having the right thought leadership for the sellers and the sellers using it, those two things have to come
So I've
together.
always maintained that complex industrial salespeople need to be at least conversant in business accounting. They need to understand how companies make financial decisions rather than just vomit up these sophomoric ROI calculations that really make them look silly as opposed to sophisticated. What's your position on that? Do you agree, disagree?
I'm skeptical of a lot of ROI calculations because you can use data in any way to tell the story that you want to tell. So if I'm on the receiving end of ROI conversation, I'm going to ask a lot of questions about that. So if I'm a buyer, I'm going to be skeptical. I've had this conversation with several of my clients to ask them the question: do you understand how your customers make money? Can you sit down? Do you have a trust with them that they would actually show you a balance sheet, or they will show you the figures behind their key revenue streams? because if you can understand that, then you can help them make better decisions about their business. So I fully support sellers understanding the financials of their industry and also the financials of their customers. I know one seller who's also really astute at understanding the financials of the competition. So to the degree that you can get that data, especially in publicly held organizations, what's the stock price? What are the analysts saying? What's happening in the competitive organizations, so that you can have those competitive discussions with the prospect or client, but you have substance to back it up.
That's interesting. In the capital equipment space, the time I see that coming into play is in market downturns, when they really start to be distressed and then they make silly decisions. And the corollary to that is I've seen some companies be very creative by using trade credit insurance to allow them to take on prospects in a market downturn, companies that might be a little bit problematic as a credit risk, but it's insured. And so they've got a lot of comfort going in and taking deals that others might be hesitant to take. So I'm in two different perspectives on that point that you're making about understanding the competitive financial situation too.
And when you understand, that's a great example of understanding what are the options available to
Right.
me to go have a conversation with the customer. So in my industrial space, my industrial manufacturing customers, they are working with customers who are, they're struggling with inflation. They're struggling with the cost of money. They might be, depending on their industry, they might have a lot of inventory on their books that they have to sell through before they're going to buy from you. If you have the financial acumen to ask them those types of questions, you're not going into a conversation suggesting that they buy $1 million more of something that they already have inventory on. What if instead you help them sell through
Right.
that, and you helped give them creative ideas to sell through that? That's way more valuable to me as the customer than you coming in saying, hey, it's time for you to buy that next round of whatever. Well, hey, I still have all this here that I still need to
Right.
sell.
Yeah, good point. Where do you go for new ideas as you want to continuously learn? What blogs or podcasts or YouTube channels or books? Where do you spend your time?
Yeah, I've loved spending my time at in-person events when I can do that. I get a lot of energy by being around other people and going to interesting conferences. Um, I'm blanking on specific names of conferences at the moment, of course, but I'm always looking for, is there something that just is curious or interesting to me, whether it's in sales or leadership. I'm actually going to an M&A conference later in September, which is not my primary market, but it's something interesting to me that I think would make me a better rounded business person to go have conversations with CEOs and leaders. That's probably what I'm doing right now. In addition to, there are some good local events here in Columbus that bring together CEOs, entrepreneurs, just for all different kinds of conversation. So that's probably where I'm spending my time right now.
Right. Tell us about your business specifically, your ideal client, how people, if they want to get in touch with you, how they reach you, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tackle the second part of that
Okay.
first. Anybody who's watching or listening, please feel free to, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Let me know that you heard me here with a conversation with Ed. You are also welcome to go out to my website. A lot of different free resources out there. So those are the two places that I would direct you to connect further. My ideal client is a CEO or an executive sales leader who is typically leading, let's say, like a $100 million to $500 million organization. For me, the distinguishing factor is I really like to work with CEOs and sales leaders who are truly forward-thinking individuals. They're decisive. They really value, they've come to a point in their business and in their career where they really value wanting to have smart outside voices to help guide them. They want somebody to help them create sales strategy to go forward into the future. They want that outside help to skill up their teams. So visionary, decisive CEOs and sales leaders in the middle market, It can be a variety of sectors: industrial, professional services, tech. So that doesn't particularly matter. And if they're selling complex solutions in the B2B space, that's icing on the cake.
And then do you only work at the executive and board level, or are you actually coaching and training individual contributors too?
I do actually coach and train individual contributors. So typically the way that I work is I roll out my skill development curriculum. I have one for individual contributors and one for leaders. I'll roll it out across the organization. And then when I'm working with a company, there's always a coaching component to that.
Got it. All right, kind of big meta level question. Looking out 5 years, the biggest risk and the biggest opportunity as you think about trying to optimize a B2B sales team in the kind of coming environment?
Yeah. Ooh, looking out 5 years. Gosh, what is that? 2029? Oh, what the heck? I would say the biggest opportunity is for organizations they're fearless. They have fearless leadership in the sense that the CEO is willing to explore new markets. They're willing to take new ideas and put them into the organization. If there isn't like a fearlessness and a willingness to be very front and center in the marketplace, at best you're going to be mediocre, and at worst you're going to lose market share and just have a whole host of downside consequences.
So that's kind of the risk and the opportunity folded together. Be fearless, and if you're timid, it's going to cost you.
Absolutely. And this comes back to our board opportunity, our board conversation. Look at the makeup of your board. You have a huge opportunity to have sales expertise on your board. I personally believe that's a big differentiating factor for smart boards and organizations into the future.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Amy. What a great conversation.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. All right, everyone watching and listening, others deserve to hear Amy's insights as well. So you got to like and share and comment and subscribe and pass this along to other people so they know about it as well. Thanks so much for your time and appreciate your listening.